I'm Nicole, and this is Remakes, Reboots, and Revivals, an original podcast about unoriginality. And today is part one on our little Wallace and Gromit series. If you are a listener or a watcher of this podcast, you'll notice that I am solo today. I am a big fan of Nick Park movies, and Orlando and Eddie, not so much, but it's okay. I got you covered with a bunch of fun facts, general trivia, and my overall opinions on these pieces. In our part one episodes, we typically talk about the original. And in this case, I'm going to focus on two, although I will talk about other Wallace and Gromit properties. But before I get into that, who are Wallace and Gromit? Well, let's talk. Wallace and Gromit is a beloved British stop-motion animated franchise created by Nick Park of Aardman Animations. It centers on Wallace, an eccentric, cheese-loving inventor, and his very loyal and very resourceful dog, Gromit. That's pretty much the basis for every single one of these films. It's all about the shenanigans that they get up to on a day-to-day basis in their lives. And what's unique about their relationship is that despite being silent, Gromit is the more resourceful one, like I said, of the duo. He's the brains, and he often has to rescue Wallace from his very well-meaning but disastrous experiments. So there are 4 short films of Wallace and Gromit and 2 feature-length films. And I'm really going to focus on the first 2 short films. The first one being A Grand Day Out, which came out in 1989, and the second short film being The Wrong Trousers, which came out in 1993. Now, before I dissect those a little bit, the third film was A Close Shave that came out in 1995, so they came out pretty closely one after another. But we didn't get another Wallace and Gromit property until their first feature-length film, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, that came out in 2005. Shortly after, we got their fourth short film, A Matter of Loaf and Death, which is my favorite little reference to the Powell and Pressburger movie, A Matter of Life and Death. And now, in 2024, we have their most recent film, Vengeance Most Foul. Wallace and Gromit has had a lot of spin-offs, mostly the most famous one being Shaun the Sheep, which has its own television series, and it's had 2 movies. And there is also Timmy Time, which is a British children's television show. Wallace and Gromit is pretty beloved, I would say, not only in England, but I would say internationally. I mean, here I am an American and I love it. They do have a statue, a bronze sculpture dedicated to them in Park's hometown of Preston, Lancashire, England. Okay, so let's talk now about A Grand Day Out. This was the very first Wallace and Gromit short film, and it actually took an incredible 6 years for Nick Park to make. It was actually part of Nick Park's graduation project at the National Film and Television School, which also helped provide funding for the film. Originally, Gromit, who is the dog, if you're unfamiliar, Wallace is the human, Gromit is the dog. Gromit was supposed to be a cat, but Nick Park actually realized that a dog, 1, would be easier to animate, and 2, I think would just speak a little bit more true to that friendship of theirs, dog being man's best friend. And A Grand Day Out was originally supposed to be about 40 minutes long, but it was trimmed down into, I think, about the 20-minute short film that you can currently, as of January 2025, catch on Amazon Prime if you have a membership. The film is pretty much showing Wallace and Gromit in their everyday life, just chilling on a bank holiday, and they realize that their fridge is empty and they have no cheese. And so, naturally, the moon in their world is made up of cheese. So they decide to casually build a rocket and fly to the moon for cheese. And after landing, they set up a picnic and they sample all of the cheese there that's on the moon. Then they encounter this coin-operated robot and shenanigans ensue, essentially. Like I said, this film was originally 40 minutes long. They decided to scrap a lot of it, which included a lot of different characters. But this robot continued. And this robot reminds me a lot as an American who's new to this. I was born the year before this movie came out. So naturally, I'm going to go into it with some of the films that I grew up on. One of them being WALL-E. This film, I think, has a big influence on WALL-E. And it's kind of like an amalgamation of not just WALL-E, but some of the guys who are on the ship, the Axiom, floating in space, especially the one that's like begrudgingly cleaning up after everybody. I think I was not prepared for this character to be such a significant part of A Grand Day Out, but I found it to be very charming nonetheless. I think the urgency of needing cheese is one that I completely relate to, and I think is an adorable premise for kind of like the main motivation for our characters. And the fact that they go to such lengths that they build this whole rocket within the shortest time frame, and that they skyrocket off to the moon just for cheese. There's this great bit in it too, when right as they're doing the countdown and they're about to launch their rocket, uh, Wallace realizes that they have no crackers, the second emergency of the film. And so he must rush down and do it within a whopping, I think, 10 seconds before the rocket takes off. Again, incredibly relatable. If I had the power to build myself something to blast off and to get myself some cheese, I absolutely would do it. This film is interesting to watch because this is the first ever, so they don't quite look the same. I think Nick Park is still trying to figure things out. I mean, like the fact that there was a robot and there were supposed to be other characters, he kind of wanted it to be this whole thing. It's a great first film to set up this template, but it's not as strong as the properties to come. Out of the short films, I would say that my favorite is the second one. And I think the second one is one that we're absolutely going to focus on because this new one, Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance the Most Foul, is a legacy sequel to the second short film, The Wrong Trousers. So let's talk about The Wrong Trousers. The story follows Wallace and Gromit as they take in a mysterious new penguin lodger. And this penguin secretly is plotting a jewel heist using Wallace's mechanical techno trousers that he built to take Gromit out on walks. This penguin forces Wallace to unwittingly assist him in his attempt to steal this jewel. And Gromit discovers the scheme and devises a plan to foil it. It's incredibly impressive stop motion animation, and it's definitely my favorite of the short films. This penguin that we're talking about, Feathers McCraw, there's this great gag where he puts on these rubber gloves, these red rubber gloves, and all the humans are convinced that the moment he puts it on, that he's a chicken. He's not a penguin, he's a chicken. So he disguises himself as a chicken, and he is known to be wanted by the law. And you see posters throughout the movie that say, "Have you seen this chicken?" That's how he's getting away with it. He has convinced everyone that he is chicken, and Wallace is also convinced. There's a couple of gags where the moment he takes off the rubber glove from his head, he's like, "Oh my God, it's you, penguin." And it's so silly, but it demonstrates this important thing too about the human beings within the Wallace and Gromit world, where although they are brilliant and mad inventors, they are quite gullible. They could be a little daft at sometimes. And so Gromit, the dog, is not as easily foiled, but Wallace is, and other humans are. I mean, they're literally, the signs say, "Have you seen this chicken?" Not penguin, chicken. So it's kind of my favorite tidbit about the human beings in these movies. It continues on throughout. They're kind of not the smartest. Animals always get the best of them in this world, which is a really nice dynamic, I think. One that's I find to be very comical, but also, kind of fitting that people are not the brightest sometimes. I also love this film because it really deepens the Wallace and Gromit relationship a bit more. All this happens on Gromit's birthday. It begins and he's like, gee, he looks at the calendar, Gromit's birthday this day, playing it cool, but you could tell that, he's looking forward to it and he's hoping that his partner Wallace, his master Wallace, his friend Wallace will get him something good. And what Wallace gets him is a leash and a collar and these trousers that take him for a walk. And Gromit's just not about it. He's like, "Oh, this is boring. These trousers are too slow, and I do not want to be walked by a pair of mechanical trousers. And I probably don't even want a leash and a collar. I'd probably just want Wallace to make me some nice food or something, and then we can chill all day." And during Gromit's birthday is when this penguin comes in. And this penguin plays some mind games on mostly Wallace, and it works. He, coerces him and he does his shoes and he gets him stuff, and Wallace is immediately taken in by him. And he's like, "Oh, a paying lodger." The reason why they need this lodger, by the way, is because all these inventions are not cheap. And even Wallace lets it slip that the thing that he used all his funds on were also for Gromit's gift. So they're kind of broke. They need this money. And Wallace is like, "Oh my gosh, this penguin's awesome. He's giving me my slippers and he's getting me tea and he's paying. This is a great situation." And Gromit is jealous and feels unwanted. And it's all happening on poor Gromit's birthday. So he decides to leave. He's like, "Oh, I I'm no longer Wallace's pet. This penguin has taken my spot." And he packs his bag and he gets up and he leaves. And it's actually pretty tragic. He spends the night in a trash can. But then he starts seeing the penguin messing with the trousers, and he gets a little sus about him. And so he follows him and he realizes that, he's onto something. I think my favorite gag in the movie too is when after the penguin Feathers McGraw has done what he's done and Gromit is like, I'm here and I'm not going to let you get away with it. The penguin pulls out a gun. Oh my gosh, I almost spit out my water when that happened. I just was not expecting that. And it was really, really hilarious. I mean, this penguin is pretty dastardly. And thus begins this train chase sequence. And it's just actually kind of a thrilling chase. Like if you were to think of top train chases in movies, I would argue that this should be on this list. It's so much fun. It's kind of implausible, but that's the whole thing about Wallace and Gromit is that all of this is highly implausible. So if you're kind of sitting back being like, this is a bit much, it's all fantasy, it's all fun, and it's a great time. It's incredibly British too. I mean, I'm not a British person, but I've seen a few films, I've seen a few series, and we kind of all know the difference between British humor, British men versus American men. And to me, it is so, so British. Wallace is such a respectable, upstanding citizen. There's definitely a charm in Wallace's overt simplicity. He is someone who is quite grand and can create and can concoct magnificent inventions, and yet he's oblivious to red flags. He doesn't realize Feathers isn't a chicken until the penguin takes off his rubber glove. Um, he doesn't even realize that he's being used for this whole jewel heist. He's like fast asleep for all of it. He's totally unaware until the alarms go off. And when it's all happening and when the trousers are gone wrong, and he's like, oh, it's the wrong trousers, he turns to Gromit. He turns to his dog to be rescued. Nick Park apparently said that he chose the name Wallace because one day he was walking out and he saw a woman with her dog and his collar said Wallace. And he thought that that was such a great name for a pet. And if you think about it, who's pet here? Gromit takes care of Wallace most of the time. So Wallace is the pet. There is something very adorable, if you will, about Wallace. Like if you have a pet and they're getting into shenanigans, there's something every time that they get into it and you rescue them from either getting stuck somewhere or jumping too high or just being mischievous, you love them for it, despite the fact that they're being so silly and you kind of want to strangle them, but you love them for that. And that's very much Wallace's whole vibe, which I'm a fan of. It works for me. So here's some fun facts about this. Other than the fact that this was Nick Park's student film, every single Wallace and Gromit film has been nominated for an Academy Award. A Grand Day Out was nominated for Best Short Film Animated, but it lost to Nick Park's other film, Creature Comforts, which is kind of insane. I mean, he leaves the National Film and Television School and he gets nominated for 2 Academy Awards his first year and he wins one. That's kind of insane. The Wrong Trousers in 1993 won Best Animated Short Film at the Oscars. The next one, The Close Shave, in 2 years also won Best Animated Short Film at the Oscars. Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, the feature-length film, that won Best Animated Film that year at the Oscars. And A Matter of Loaf and Death in 2008 was nominated for Best Animated Short Film, but did not win. Now, this new movie, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, when I'm recording this, the Academy Awards haven't been announced yet, but I'm going to place my money on the fact that it will get nominated. I don't know if it will win, but it will certainly get nominated and solidify the fact that every single Wallace and Gromit film is pretty much a critical darling and will remain stop motion animation classic films for years to come. And also just things to consider if you go and you watch these films. Like I said, they are currently available on Amazon Prime right now. A Grand Day Out, the film from 1989, that took 6 years to complete, partially because it was Nick Park's student project and he had limited resources, but also if you look at A Grand Day Out in particular, you could see the human imprint on these characters. You could see the fact that they have been sculpted with hands. Now, if you know film, 24 frames per second, right? That 24 frames get captured for 1 second. So it takes 24 frames to capture me doing this in a second. So if you're making a stop motion film and you have to account for every single move that they make in the course of maybe 5 seconds, that is all you can do as an animator for a day. So again, animators typically only achieve 2 to 5 seconds of footage per day, which is insane. And that's not accounting for the creation of these detailed miniature sets that they have to build. The characters and their different expressions, like if they cry or if they are scared. The team of these movies meticulously plan every shot in advance, right? They have to storyboard it and plan it. And it is quite an endeavor. A Grand Day Out, it took 6 years to complete. And The Wrong Trousers and A Close Shave, those took about 2 to 3 years to complete. The films, The Curse of the Boy Rabbit and Vengeance Most Foul, they took about 5 years to complete. And the actual animation time takes about 2 years. That process just sounds absolutely painstaking. And it's definitely the craftsmanship that goes into it is something to consider, which is crazy because I think the end result is just so charming and feels so effortless and timeless. I don't know. I'm definitely a fan. But what do you guys think? Are you big Wallace and Gromit fans? Have you never checked it out, but due to my endless rambling about it, you want to check it out now? Well, first of all, you should. But second of all, let us know. At me in the comments, write your thoughts, share some of your feelings about it with me, and be sure to tune into the part 2 episode coming in a couple of days where I talk about the new Wallace and Gromit film, Vengeance Most Foul, and share some thoughts and fun facts on that one. So until next time, stay unoriginal.